What's going on, guys? Kaigu here. I'm doing fairy combos today. It's going to be a little bit different than last time. Let me know what you think. Let's get into it. Alright guys, like I said, I'm doing fairy combos. What I did last time was I took two fairies, put them together, and then made that a picture and put that in my resources channel, and then told you, okay, these two fairies go together, these two fairies go together. But there's actually more than what was listed there. It was just, if I used a fairy, they were pretty much used and I couldn't use them again. But there's fairies that work well with several options. What I'm going to do now is I have the pictures of all the fairies right here, and I'm going to just talk about the fairy itself, and then each fairy it can work well together with, and then work my way down. It might be a bit of a longer video. Let me know if you prefer this or the other style, and let's get into it. Rimu, her main thing is that she's a setup as well as a buffer. So what she's going to do is stop them from moving. It's generally long enough that if we have most animations will be enough to land something. Some longer ones it may not, but we should be able to hit most things based on the cannot move. And then her other major thing is obviously giving you an attack buff as well as other fairy damage boost. So either a nuker bonus, you can go two ways with this. You can either go a nuker route, just trying to boost the next fairy and let that fairy try to get the kill, or you can kind of go a CC chain route, can't move, stun, can't move, stun kind of situation. Now if we're trying to do the kind of nuke someone out, a amazing option is Urza. You go Rimu, Urza, dead. A lot of people are going to take a lot of damage from that. You get the attack boost, which Urza scales crazy off of. You get the fairy damage boost, and then you hit them with a full power Urza that they can't dodge from because they can't move. There's some ways out, obviously. As a reminder, there is the cat pet skill. There is strength of nature. There is dragon roar. There's also if a particular ability is stopping you from moving but not stopping you from casting, there's also ninja tool from ninja, which people have pretty much stopped using recently because we gotta go through these ebbs and waves of this is an issue, everyone uses this to counter it, stops being an issue, people stop using it, and then it comes back. So depending on where the meta is for you, it could be good. Now as far as other damage ones, snakeberry, also a great option. They both play really well off of each other because they both boost. We'll talk more about snakeberry when we talk about how she works with it. Another great one is laurel. Laurel with his semi-tracking doesn't really need to track because of the Milim effect, but even if they get out of the Milim effect, Laurel is still a good secondary for that semi-follow effect and enough damage to really punch home. Now when we talk about the CC route, right, you try to chain CC someone with Milim, a great option is going to be something like Butterfly Orchid. Can't move, can't move. Generally you want to do a can't move stun can't move because there's something coded into the game. I don't know the numbers of it, but if you use the same CC multiple times in a row, it lasts less long, it seems like. But if you use something different in between, it refreshes it. So a can't move stun can't move is better than a can't move in my opinion. So you don't directly go Milim into Butterfly Orchid, but it's kind of that chain. Now what you can do is Sakura is a great option because Sakura does a stun, which is different than the can't move, but also gives that defense down, allowing you to chain again back into that butterfly orchid. The best option, in my opinion, is licorice. This was the most hated combo for forever when Milim first came out, was Milim licorice. What a combo. Can't move, damage boost, stun, massive damage. Really great hits back and forth. Rimu doesn't really have, we're going on into Rimu now. Rimu doesn't have many great options. What Rimu needs is a stunner can't move to land that gluttonous ability. So all the fairies I just talked about with the stunner can't move are great options to go with Rimu so you can land it. Generally, people end up using just these two together to boost the damage from Rimu and make sure Rimu lands. Snakeberry boosts the damage of the next fairy you use, as well as if it's high enough, will boost her damage as well. So 2 fairies. So generally you either want, as we've been talking about, a stunner can't move, which you can just look back at what we've been talking about, or you can try to put her with a fairy that just does a crazy amount of damage, and then use your class to CC them so they can't move. As far as fairies that combo well with just doing massive damage, Urza is obviously the queen here. These two will hit like a truck together. Then we have Laurel, like we talked about before. Great option for just doing massive damage. In PvE, Twin Lotus is best in slot. Those two do really, really well together. Or Gypsophilia. Now talking about Urza. Urza doesn't really need anything. Ideally, she would need to land her skill. But it's fast enough that even if you dodge, you're going to get hit by a little bit of it, which is generally enough, because she also gives your class damage boost. So any of the can't move stun effects, Milim, Butterfly Orchid, you want faster stun effects or can't move effects. Sakura does it, but needs a setup. We'll talk about that when we get to it. But Butterfly Orchid and Milim are best in slot in what we're trying to do here. Butterfly Orchid gives you a shield, as well as tells them they can't move and does some damage. The damage isn't the highest as far as fairies, but it's enough to count. And generally, she is what we look at as a setup fairy herself. Very similar to what Milim is doing. You can't move, whereas Rimu is more of an offensive option because of the attack and fairy damage buff. Butterfly Orchid could be seen more as a defensive option because of the shield she gives you. Hibiscus is a healing option, generally seen as a great 1-2 with Butterfly Orchid, just because they both do pulsing damage around themselves. Butterfly Orchid stops them from moving, and Hibiscus does a bunch of damage. Hibiscus heals you over time, and Butterfly Orchid gives you a shield that ignores healing, right? Because healing only goes to your max HP. A shield is above that. So if someone can do 110% of your HP, any amount of healing is not going to matter. So you want a shield as well to put you to, let's say, 120% HP. Great combo right there. Sakura, she is an extender in my opinion. She is not a great lead stunner. You either need to use some kind of other fairy or some kind of skill to last long enough until her stun lands. But when it does, it's a defense down, which is very powerful. You can't really ignore a defense down and the stun ability. She generally wants something to go before her, ideally Butterfly Orchid or Rimuru, like I said, you generally want a not move, then a stun, stun, then a not move. You don't really want a stun and a stun. And as I'm sure it's been clear, the cannot moves are pretty almost instant with Milim and Butterfly Orchid, whereas the stuns take a second with things like Sakura and Licorice. We have Mistletoe. Mistletoe is an interesting one. It has an effect that no one else has that locks someone out of dodges, really, because you put them in a circle, and if they try to dodge out of it, they get stunned regardless of their dodge. And the circle is a proper size to land something like a laurel or a Urza inside the circle. You are guaranteed to land these skills. Even a Gypsophilia works well with what she's trying to do. Her best application is something like Shrine Peak on the peak. Try to lock down a fight, make sure it's just you and one or two other people, and then use your other fairies to really go for the damage. Laurel doesn't really need anything. Ideally, he would get the most out of a buffer, such as snakeberry or Milim. Even the defense down from Sakura works really well with what Laurel's trying to do. Just hard damage and follow them, but he doesn't really need anything to do what he needs to do. Gypsophilia, primarily a PvE unit, because it takes several stacks to do what it wants to do. Now, what is interesting is that max stats at 7 Starlight, she does reduce CCs on you. She also gives you, obviously, a bunch of cooldown, a bunch of damage increase. This tends to matter in something like Guild War. You could do something like that. If Legion War comes back, she can be very powerful. But besides that, not really making the mark. Licorice combos well with the can't move setups. She is the best stunner, as I said. So you really want Milim or Butterfly Orchid, Twin Lotus, PvE unit, other buff effects like Snakeberry or Milim you want. Onto Earth, Hydrea is your most important in the PvE context because she's going to give you the bonus damage against Earth weakness. She doesn't really combo with anything. Generally, you would want like a stun or something so she can land her ability. That would be either Birds of Paradise or Primrose to land what you're trying to land. Birds of Paradise, stun, AoE damage. Doesn't really need anything, but we'll definitely enjoy that crit up from Foxglove or the gamble effect from Tulip. Tulip is literally still the queen of Earth. She is used on every PvP or PvE Earth team. The gamble effect is kind of an unknown quantity when we talk about any game mode. It just adds a bunch and can't really be stopped. It can't even be eaten by Rimuru. It's a crazy buff. Doesn't really need anything to go with her. Even her ability is pretty quick. If I have to say something to go with her, it would be a damage amp like Hydrea or Marigold, which will give you Earth damage amp. Foxglove, kind of slow, gives you that crit up if you have a shield. So you would want something that gives you a shield, or you want something that cares about the critting, which Earth doesn't really have. So the only real option at this point is to stun them, which will be Birds of Paradise or Primrose. What Incarnation? She does great AoE damage, stacks the road very quickly. Her best friends are going to be Damage Amps, Earth Anatheria, and Marigold, as well as other kinds of damage over time effects, such as the burn effect from Daisy. Daisy, same thing as what I just said with Carnation. Marigold does a slow for PvP, but also does a damage amp for PvE. So we generally lock her into PvE, which is just Earth Anatheria there. Primrose, stun, damage decrease, made for PvP. She allows you to hit Tulip, Foxglove, or Earth Anatheria a lot easier. Survive stuff. Also is a good initial stun to go with Birds of Paradise. Onto Wind. May as well say Windy doesn't exist. She gives the wind weakness but doesn't do anything with it. No damage increase, no nothing, doesn't matter. Radiance Camellia has the tornado effect. There's two things of note here. One, it does a knockup, so it allows you to hit other AoE skills easier, as well as once they get hit by the knockup, they become immune for the next two hits. If they're immune to knockup for any other reason, they're still immune to knockup, so you're still stacking a damage amp on them. So she's great into people that have ignore knockup, knockback, things like Gladiator, things like Priest, things like this. Oh, or even Mechanician with Armor with their Netherfire. But as for what goes with her, that's pretty hard because like actual Camellia can go well with her. Regular Camellia does the initial knockup and then allows you to hit the combo with Radiance. Tranquil is powerful because she is a lot of a faster skill than most wind units, which will just do good damage, but doesn't really do anything special here. A good one is Eldewise, which gives them a anti-buff effect. So if you just want to do knockups and ignore the can't be knocked up, can't be knocked back effects, Eldewise is a good option. She puts a poison on them that they can't get buffs, and most of the ways that they can't be knocked up, knocked back is due to buffs. So that's a decent combo. As far as Tranquil Balloonflower, she's generally here for her passive, giving you a cooldown, but she doesn't really have a combo here. She's just a solid damage output that has a amazing passive. Then we have Almond Blossom and Eldewise. I talk about these two together all the time. This is a 1-2 combo. Both of them giving you great passives. Almond Blossom giving you that ignore the first debuff coming my way. Eldewise giving you crit immunity. Very, very powerful. Even their skills go well together. I can't think of a pairing other than these two. Dandelion keeps track of whatever you used before and gets bonus effects, but it's generally just like a Starlight thing, very similar to what we talked about earlier with Gypsophilia. Her best combos is going to be something that keeps them in the circle for longer. Something like Radiant Camellia, regular Camellia are the best options here. Hyacinth, generally just here to give you some extra cooldown. The probably best in slot is going to be with Tranquil Balloonflower, just to get stack, and then go off that and kind of ignore the fairies there, And then what you can do is have an 8 fairy quartet, and then use these two as just kind of a burner team to give you some cooldown, and then swap to your other team. That's an option at this point. Regular Camellia, pretty decently quick knockup, high power. She can go well with the other Camellia, like we said. Can do decent with high-powered ones, such as Dandelion or Tranquil Bloomflower. And then the last one, Balloon Flower. Oh man. She, for being a Gen 2, she is still strong. Pull them in, defense down. Goes really well with regular Camellia. Radiant Camellia pulls them into the tornado. Really good with Tranquil Bloomflower. Does great with everything. Everything in wind wants a balloon flower. Into water, Viola got power crept really hard, which is strange as a Gen 3 fairy, but that's the state of the game. Candok does an AoE heal. She doesn't really have anything she pairs with, but she even has an anti-pairing with Gardenia. Gardenia decreasing the healing, which will make Candok heal less. So there's nothing to boost, but besides the echo itself, but there's something to reduce it, which makes Candok not do what she wants to do. It'd be interesting if Candok, what Candok SP needs is it needs to be a big heal that gives a defense up and also turns anti-healing into healing increase. Done. Then we have Gardenia. Her actual skill itself is just damage, nothing too crazy. Pairs well with the other damage ones, which will be Viola could work with her. Viola giving you a setup to land the damage. Viola, her main thing here is being a setup fairy, but we kind of already have two other setup fairies that are better that we'll talk about. Lotus and Hydrea. Blue Rose, massive here for the passive. Do more damage when you're high HP, take less damage when you're low HP. Pairs really well with Gardenia. Pairs really well with either of these two, Lotus or Hyacinth. Could also pair decently well with Ikoria. Now we'll talk about Ikoria. Gives you that anti-death. So low HP, anti-death. Shake hands, they do really well together. Then we talk about the sisters right here, Lotus and Hydrea. They both have some kind of mini CC, either can't move or draw effect. They both do a defense up or another buff to you defensively, and then they're both decently quick. So you can either pair them into each other if you're like a support person and trying to put one person in, stick one person in place. They're not going to enjoy being stuck with those two. You can mix one of them with a Viola to make sure Viola hits, and then use the third one to really mess with someone. Or you can use one as a setup, as we said before, to make sure a Blue Rose or a Gardenia hits, or make sure a lavender hits. Lavender puts them asleep and makes you deal more damage to them. You have a couple options here. You can either just put them to sleep and wait for your cooldowns, or you can put them to sleep and use that damage amp to try to do enough damage to kill them in their sleep. And the only way to really do that is with something like Blue Rose that also gives you a damage amp when you're at high HP. So that's your 1-2 combo to try to kill someone. Down to fire, we're down to the last 10 units in the game, guys. We have Scarlet Wish, Chestnut Rose, Chestnut Rose SP. her main one to go with in PvE is going to be Ixoria. They both take away your HP to give you a damage amp. Definitely what you want in PvE and PvP. She pairs really well with something like Dahlia, if you're still using her, because lose HP, get a shield. But while you lost it, she also gives you HP steal rate. This gives you HP steal rate, and hopefully you trigger it enough, even in a class that doesn't have HP steal rate, like Ninja. A Ninja with Chestnut Rose and Dahlia, giving you enough HP steal rate to try to heal back the HP that you lost, or you can try to just do enough damage with a swap team. Generally, that's the kind of rotation you're kind of looking at here. There's kind of a mini knockback at the middle, which could mean you could do something with Rose, but I don't really expect it. Natsu really needs a setup. That's Fire's biggest issue right now, is there's no real setup fairy besides Hydrea of Flames. This is your queen of setup. They can't dodge damage amp, just crazy stuff. But that's the only way you're going to hit a Natsu, unless your class has skills that that do some kind of stun or something, so Natsu can hit. Whenever I talk about Natsu, I have to talk about Anathria. They both do execute damage. Their main difference here is Natsu does execute damage at a higher percentage, 70% or lower, as well as does more damage. Anathria does it at a lower percentage, 60%, 65 I think, but gives them the anti-heal, which could be very, very clutch. You could also just use both together. You could do something like Chestnut Rose, Hydrea Flames they can't dodge, then Natsu Anathria, using some kind of CC skills to make sure they land, getting that attack buff from Chestnut Rose. Very, very powerful. Another great one that you can do is Chestnut Rose Ixoria, give you that most attack possible. Hydrea Flame's going to she's going to do enough on her own with that attack buff, and then use one or the other as your execute. If you're unsure about your execute, Anathria is the go-to for the anti-heal. If you just need that extra oomph, then Natsu is the way to go. Now, talking about Hydrea Flames, as I said, she's the setup fairy, so really what she wants is more damage, which is going to be the two that we talked about before, Ixoria and Chestnut Rose SP. Winter Cherry, her actual skill itself is just damage, so ideally if you want to make her land, you would need the setup fairy, but everyone wants the setup fairy. But what she's really there for is PvE, giving them fire weakness, so she's great for a rotation. Remember, in most PvE we can swap teams. There's more than 8 fire fairies. In PvE you would ignore these two down here, and then that would be your 8 in PvE. You would do fire weakness, buff, Hydrea Flames, swap, get the buff from Dahlia, use Natsu Anathria, execute damage, Chestnut Rose whenever you feel like it. These two should be last. You would use Chestnut Rose, damage amp, and then you can choose between doing Dahlia or Rose, your choice. Rose might be a little bit slower, so people go with Dahlia. And then, like I said, use Natsu and Anatheria to finish. That's your PvE setup. PvP, the damage is here, but the setup really isn't. You really have one setup, maybe two if you count Rose's silence. Now we're at Ixoria. Ixoria's big issue is the same as Chestnut Rose, that you lose HP, but she doesn't heal you like Chestnut Rose does, so Ixoria is a big hindrance in PvP unless you're literally one-shotting someone. Very similar boat over there. Regular Chestnut Rose, PvE exclusive, goes really well with Winter Cherry. Winter Cherry gives them the weakness and a damage amp against the weakness. Chestnut Rose gives a further damage amp against the weakness. Anatheria we already talked to death. The only two left is going to be Rose and Diablo, which are really the same conversation. Rose is more AoE, Diablo is more single target. Even with their basics, AoE single target, Diablo has a single target silence, which can be seen as another setup. If you're really needing a 1v1 setup, Diablo could be an option. I don't really see it. The skill doesn't really matter. Rose does a silence on cast, and then a few seconds later a second silence, which is just a lot better. And the attack is AoE, which is going to hit more people, and it's burn damage, so it's going to ignore a lot of defense. But that was kind of long-winded, guys. That's the combos for all the fairies. Let me know if you prefer just the two-person cells like I did before, or if you prefer this, where I talk about all of them as they interconnect and such. Till next time, guys.